Hi friends, in the last few videos, I have spoken on several critical qualities in leadership, but today I want to do something slightly different. This is once again a real story of a department in a company, but without naming the company or the department, I have adapted the core essence into a story form. This is a woodcutter story that is not the usual one we have all heard during our school or training days. This one is different and it highlights values and principles that are often overlooked in our day to day work. And once we go through this short story, I will connect it to the real world workplace scenarios and leadership principles that all of us could easily relate to. Here we go with the story. A timber merchant in a village was on a search for a woodcutter to cut the trees in his vast forest for the last 6 months. One day, a 35-year-old man approached him not looking to be a woodcutter, but was looking for a job as an accounts clerk. He had a background in accounting, but there were no clerical roles available. However, the merchant, impressed by his physique, offered him the role of a woodcutter. With no other job in hand and a family to support, the man accepted the offer. The target was clear: cut at least 3 trees per day and prepare the wood in specified sizes. On day 1, full of energy, he cut 4 trees and delivered well prepared timber. The merchant was impressed and he thought that he had recruited the right guy. But over time, his productivity began to dip: 2 trees a day by week 2 and only 1 by the end of the month. He said the trees were very hard to cut and the weather was not comfortable, due to which he was getting exhausted quickly. The merchant was concerned and decided to hire another woodcutter. The second woodcutter, who was also aged 35 years, was not a woodcutter by profession and was lean and not particularly strong looking. He made him responsible for half of the area, which was reduced from the first woodcutter. Though the merchant was very skeptical, to his surprise, the second woodcutter also cut 4 trees on day 1, and by week 2, he was cutting 6 per day. The merchant was thrilled, but not the first woodcutter. The first woodcutter became increasingly envious. He even requested the merchant to swap the area with the other woodcutter, which was done, but even then, the first woodcutter's output did not increase. He was becoming very inquisitive to know how this woodcutter was able to give increased output. One day, he quietly watched his peer from a distance and saw him working hard for 2 hours, followed by an hour of rest. He was seeing the second woodcutter's rear portion only and was not able to make out what he was doing from this distance when he was sitting. But certainly it appeared that this guy was taking time off and was not working full time, though the output was high. This only deepened his suspicion. He rushed to the merchant and accused the second woodcutter of cheating him. The merchant decided to investigate. Together, they watched the second woodcutter's work from the same spot, and only his rear portion was visible. Indeed, he worked for 2 hours and then sat down for 1 hour. From that distance, it looked like he was just resting, and the first woodcutter strongly recommended to cut his salary accordingly. Therefore, the second woodcutter was called to the office of the timber merchant the next day, and the first woodcutter was pleased that his salary was going to be reduced from now on. The timber merchant asked the second woodcutter whether he stops cutting the tree after every 2 hours of work. He said yes. The timber merchant became very furious and informed him that he was being paid for 8 hours, and if he was going to work for less number of hours, his salary would be reduced accordingly. The first woodcutter, who was standing in the same room, was very thrilled that he could contribute in some way. But the second woodcutter informed the timber merchant that he did not sit idle and invited him to the site. All of them visited the site to understand, and the second woodcutter demonstrated his work by cutting the tree for 2 hours, and thereafter he started sharpening the axe for the next 1 hour. He said if he was able to provide an output of 6 trees per day consistently, it was because he was sharpening the axe regularly. The merchant appreciated his approach and started liking him. The first woodcutter was stunned. He had never thought of sharpening the axe. He adopted the same practice now, and soon both were producing at the same level. But the story doesn't end there. The second woodcutter initiated a discussion with his colleague and expressed his happiness that he had also started sharpening his axe to give better output. The first woodcutter did not like his comments and advised him to stay away, which was a very rude response. But the other guy continued and said that by increasing the output, he may get rewarded by way of increase in salary. The first woodcutter commented that the timber merchant was a miser and would never increase his salary, though he needed it badly to meet his expenses, and he left the place showing his displeasure. One day, the bank manager visited the timber merchant in his office to inquire when the loans taken by him were likely to be settled. He said they are already overdue, and if he does not pay up the installments within 3 months, he will have a court case against him and all his forest operations would come to a halt. The timber merchant said if he had to pay up the installments, he had to cut and sell at least 20 trees per day, which was an uphill task for him. But the bank manager warned him of the consequences if the overdue payments were not settled within the next 3 months, and left the place. The timber merchant had kept this discussion confidential. After a few days, the second woodcutter took a short break. When he returned, his performance skyrocketed. Now he was cutting 10 trees a day. The first woodcutter, baffled again, resumed his long-distance observation. He heard strange sound coming from the site and was confused. The merchant and he visited the site again. This time, they discovered something new. The second woodcutter had brought a machine to help him improve speed and efficiency. Innovation had entered the forest. The merchant was thrilled and offered a special incentive to the second woodcutter for his initiative. But here is the climax of the story. The second woodcutter appreciated the incentive offer and thanked the timber merchant for his kind gesture. But he had one request. The merchant looked at him with a curiosity. He said, if possible, it would be nice of the merchant to extend the same incentive to his colleague as well. There was total silence, and the first woodcutter was totally surprised. But he continued by pointing at the first woodcutter that he was his inspiration as it was his initial doubts and competition that pushed him to improve and innovate, and he would continue to share every advancement with him, and together as a team they could cut at least 20 trees per day. The merchant was pleased and asked him what was the significance of 20 trees per day. The second woodcutter revealed that he overheard the discussion between the merchant and the bank manager, and from that day he was looking for a solution to cross 20 trees per day. The merchant was deeply moved and delighted with his attitude. He smiled and embraced him and agreed to his request. The first woodcutter, overwhelmed by this gesture, was deeply touched and became too emotional. He was the one who was always suspecting the second woodcutter's work and even recommended his salary reduction and also behaved very rudely with him. He now realized that beyond hard work and technique, what was more important was the spirit of growth, humility, and mutual respect. He hugged the second woodcutter and with a heavy heart, he said, "Today I have learned something far more valuable than technique and cutting trees, and you showed it in action. You taught me what it means to grow, not just in skill, but in character. Before I sharpen my axe, I want to sharpen my heart. Before I improve my skills, I first want to become a better person like you, not just skilled, but always humble, free from jealousy and envy. I just want to focus on work, be open to learning, and always think about personality development for better performance." The first woodcutter ended his confession with a deep breath. So, this was the story of the woodcutter. And what does this story tell us? In a corporate environment, we face our own versions of this story every day. KRAs, deadlines, competition, pressure, target achievement, etc. But here are a few lessons we could take away from this story. Point 1. Working harder isn't enough. You need to work smarter. The second woodcutter was a cut above and didn't just put in hours. He ensured his tools were sharp, a metaphor for upskilling, learning, and preparing. He always focused on enhancing his efficiency and improving his strategy for delivering better results than brute force. Leaders must focus on effectiveness and not just activity. Point 2. The first woodcutter improved only when he stopped making excuses and started learning from others. Great leaders observe, listen, and learn from peers, juniors, and even from competitors. Point 3. Innovation comes from curiosity, not comfort. The second woodcutter didn't stop with being better. He adopted new technology and always looked for ways to be exponentially better. Don't wait for permission. Proactively explore effective ways to work. Point number 4. True leadership is about lifting others. When he had the chance to move ahead alone, the second woodcutter chose to bring his peer along. Instead of using his advantage to outshine the other, the second woodcutter chose to share knowledge and to perform better as a team. Here, the second woodcutter projected his subtle qualities: humbleness, transparency, teamwork, empathy, and collaboration, all of which are very important for a leader. He has just sown the seed to become a good leader. Point 5. The second woodcutter did not let ego drive his behavior. Rather, he acknowledged the role of his peer in pushing him to improve. Recognizing the contributions of others builds strong relationships. Point 6. The first woodcutter realized his mistakes and chose growth over pride. The ability to admit mistakes and change is a big strength. Point 7. The timber merchant rewarded the second woodcutter for his initiative. Recognition and reward fuel innovation, collaboration, and reinforce the right behavior. Effective managers gather facts, observe behavior firsthand, and make fair, data-driven decisions. Point 8. The second woodcutter overheard the financial crisis of the merchant and took personal ownership of helping him to meet his goal by finding a solution. True leaders take initiative beyond their job description when they see the bigger picture. Point 9. The second woodcutter did not just chase targets. He transformed his approach, innovated, mentored, and cared for the organization. Transactional managers focus on output and salary, whereas transformational leaders focus on growth, values, and building capacity for the future. Point 10. Neither woodcutter had a formal leadership title, but one led by example. Leadership is defined by actions, not designations, and is not confined to positions of authority. Point 11. In the end, both woodcutters moved from jealousy to partnership, from individual focus to team success. Point 12. Focus on output, not just activity. The merchant initially judged productivity based on time worked, but later understood the importance of how time was used. Managers should measure results and not just effort. The above are the top 12 points we could collate from this story. There are many more, but we must understand that the workplace is not about just output and target achievement. It is about attitude, mindset, and collaboration. It is the leader or the manager's responsibility to instill a work culture that is thrilling, challenging, and conducive to growth. Leadership is not about how many trees we cut, but how we help others to grow and how the department or the company is a better place to work. A healthy culture fosters learning, support, and mutual respect, not suspicion and blame. All of you must always look to improve your knowledge, to remain a cut above, work smartly, and perform above and beyond the expectations of the company to stay ahead. You will definitely get noticed and recognized. Thank you very much for watching this video, and look forward to my next video on yet another exciting story on leadership. All the best. Thank you.